Good day, everybody, from whatever time zone you're coming in from. Thank you for joining us. I'm Susan Brown, Canada Research Chair in Collaborative Digital Scholarship at the University of Guelph. And we are hosting over Zoom and from the Thinc Lab in Guelph today, this virtual and live talk on the ancestral lands of the Ahuandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, and the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I honor and acknowledge the many Indigenous and Métis peoples who have inhabited and stewarded these lands for centuries and continue to do so today, and the importance of the dish with one spoon wampum to our relations to our land and to each other. If you would like to share a land acknowledgement about where you are in the chat, please feel free to do so. And we recognize that land acknowledgements are only one small part of what needs to be done for truth and reconciliation. Welcome to the first of our 2023 lectures in the Digital Humanities Lecture Series, a collaboration among 4 institutions this year: the Center for Digital Humanities at Toronto Metropolitan University, led by Jason Boyd; the Humanities Data Lab at the University of Ottawa, led by Constance Crompton; the CRIHN at Université de Montréal, led by Michael Sinatra, who coordinates us all, and co-led at Guelph by myself and Kim Martin. Our theme this year is communities, and we have a great lineup for this semester with talks from Mike Anani from Annenberg on February 17th, Seeing Like an Algorithmic Error, and then talks later in March from Jas Morgan, and in April from Elspeth Brown. We'll send details of those talks in the chat at the end of this lecture. But right now we're going to kick off this series on communities with one of the most versatile and generous contributors to DH communities in the international scene, and that's Diane Jakacki. We are very fortunate to have with us here at Guelph this semester as a Fulbright Canada Research Chair in Digital Humanities. She's the Digital Scholarship Coordinator and Associate Faculty in Comparative and Digital Humanities at Bucknell University. Her research focuses on digital scholarly production and publication, pedagogy, and early modern British drama and culture. She's published and presented broadly on DH, including a co-edited volume, Early Modern Studies After the Digital Turn, with Laura Estel and Michael Ulliott, and What We Teach When We Teach DH, which is forthcoming from the Debates in DH series this year, co-edited with Brian Croxall. She's currently chair of the Text and Coding Initiatives Board of Directors and incoming chair of the Executive Board of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations, which is one of many reasons why I have characterized her as extremely generous to our community. She's the lead researcher of the Read London Project, principal investigator of the Mellon Foundation funded liberal arts-based publishing cooperative project, and partner with the Canadian Writing Research Collaboratory in developing the Linked Editorial Academic Framework, or LEAF, virtual research environment. Her talk today is, For Want of a Nail, Need, Speed, and the Future of Cooperation in Digital Scholarly Production. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to try to, hold on, sharing, and somebody has just entered the room. Okay, can you see that? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Can I move? Oh, I can't move that. Thank you, first of all, to Susan, Kim, the University of Guelph's College of Arts, Michael Sinatra, Fulbright Canada, and many other people and institutions. I apologize for not including you. I did it, who have enabled me to be here today and for these coming months. You may not have any idea how profound an opportunity this is for me, and I am so grateful. Second, a caveat: not knowing who my audience might include, I've tried to be general wherever possible about the digital humanities and about early modern culture. I've done my best to spell out acronyms, but please ask me at the end what something means, or put it in the chat, and hopefully somebody will give you what the acronyms are. Also, if you know me, you'll know that theorizing DH is not my forte. I'm much more comfortable or uncomfortable or anxious, I guess, in moments when I can be enthusiastic and passionate and basically emotional about all of this. So I'm not apologizing for my mode, just giving you a heads up. I apologized already. I promised Susan I wouldn't do that anymore. Party on. Okay. Let's see if we can get this move forward. There we go. In the way to wealth, Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard adviseth to circumspection and care, even in the smallest matters, because sometimes a little neglect may breed great mischief, adding, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. And for want of a horse, the rider was lost, being overtaken and slain by the enemy, all for want of care about a horseshoe nail. This proverb didn't originate with Franklin. There are versions back to the European Middle Ages and in multiple languages and in different regions. Now it's enough to just use shorthand, I think. Deep somewhere in our collective psyche, it is enough to hear for want of a nail, just as we respond when we hear beware of the big bad wolf without needing to look up her up. This talk is about building and what we need in order to build research narratives and data sets and communities of practice and cooperative endeavors. It's about weighing the need to focus at the same time, forgot to set my watch, at the same time on discrete and sometimes peculiar scholarly analysis, productive input, and sustainable infrastructures that invite collaboration that in turn is acknowledged and supported responsibly. This is also a talk about responsibility, the responsibility we have to one another as active scholar practitioners in the digital humanities, to our research and that of those who have come before us, and to the code we write and the platforms we build and what we leave to our colleagues who take them up after us. But mostly it's a talk about balancing enthusiasm and practicality, of being in a position to act on our enthusiasm and the opportunities available to us to realize our ambitions, almost all of which are time delimited, and the patience to better define and refine the scope of what we can do now and what we will need to put off until another time, and if another opportunity presents itself. Thank you. There we go. I'll use as my object lessons the experiences I've had developing the Read London project and collaborating on the evolution of the Quark platform into the LEAF virtual research environment. It will necessarily point to the Links project and my participation in that. And it will speak to the experience I'm currently having as a Fulbright Research Fellow here at the University of Guelph. The work we do in DH is hard in ways most of us were never trained for, and different from the kinds of hard work our colleagues do in other areas of the humanities. This is a truism, but it bears repeating. To this day, many stumble into DH because they have a research question or a need to undertake analysis or present evidence in ways that traditional tools and media don't support. And so often a newbie will come to one of us with a fabulous idea and a need for guidance or encouragement. People in positions like mine experience this all the time. It is literally our job to feed these people's enthusiasms, help them to jumpstart their projects, and convince our universities to provide technical and human resources to get a nascent project going without taking into account what these commitments on all sides look like. And in so doing, we are reifying past practice that we know in our hearts is not productive. We should know better. We know what happens when things aren't built well or built to last. 25 years ago or so, it seemed feasible for a few humanists with coding chops to put together an ambitious project using only the tools at hand and a handshake with their university. 10 years ago, it seemed feasible to hire contingent staffers to establish institutional digital initiatives, complete with pedagogical and technical and emotional support for willing faculty members and librarians and administrators. 5 years ago, it still seemed feasible to incorporate a 5-year data management plan into a significant grant application. We never paused to think about ephemeral seeming things like careers or institutional strategic plans or pandemics, let alone Moore's Law. But here we are, and most of those visionary scholars, please note the comment at the bottom of the slide, from 25 years ago have long since retired or moved on to other positions or just shifted research interests. Almost certainly their projects have had to go through 2 or 3 rebuilds to remain compliant with components dependencies, delivery mechanisms, or university security protocols. That is, if the projects are still maintained at all. And who recalls who shook whose hand or if a collegial gesture is equivalent to a memorandum of understanding. And here we are 10 years later, and those digital initiatives have evolved into academic credentialing programs, oftentimes without commensurate faculty, even adjunct faculty, to properly teach a well-rounded digital humanities curriculum, or a stable mechanism whereby faculty members' DH research can be properly evaluated for tenure and promotion. The people hired to grow these initiatives move on or burn out without the capacity to adequately offer skilled support to everyone who knocks on our doors. And here we are 5 years later, and we've blown past those data management plans and are seeking extensions to manage the kind of long-term institutional support we need to guarantee the kind of accessibility and sustainability our data-rich projects require. I'm not the first to reflect on this, and I'm certainly not the most eloquent or objective. I promise not to wallow in gloomy thoughts about glorious projects of old that are no more, or those initiatives that are groaning under their own weight. And as far as I can tell, Gordon Moore and his law have now been superseded by even more radical trajectories that involve data points as well as microchips. I truly believe that we have always done the best we could, and more often than not, we have got things right, or right enough so that we are now in a position to shore some things up while we figure out how to build those kinds of structures in more stable ways that, while not future-proof, can ensure that we are standards and protocols compliant enough so that people can continue to build. I'm going to sit there with the puppy for a minute. Yeah, I know, right? Think of it like a medieval cathedral or a cathedral. Those edifices literally took hundreds of years and generations of skilled workers to build. There weren't blueprints the way we understand them, but knowledge passed down from one artisan to another, as well as stably employed working communities surrounding that work site who could see the building through it to its completion. Some of those cathedrals are still active work sites. Some exist as skeletal remains. Some have disappeared completely, and that is all okay, but there was nothing wrong about the way they were built or the way they lived their life cycles, if the cathedral can live a life cycle. All right, there we go. The project I'm working on for the Fulbright has to do with realizing an understanding of events in pre-modern London and how this nebulous concept of valued occurrences, which are the glue that connects our understandings of cultural historical data points, can be integrated into the work we're doing in linking our humanistic data, so that we're not only explicitly bringing together named people and places, but also explicitly providing the reasons why those people and places are important to a particular research or research project, so as to assist in troubling and complicating the prevailing assumptions and understandings of our world. The core of this work is in the Read London project, which grows out of the Records of Early English Drama, or READ. READ's mandate is to gather documentary evidence of performance, theatre, and music in England, Scotland, and Wales for the period from 1100 to 1650. For over 400 decades, for 4 decades, READ editors have assembled a printed paper database, although they didn't realize it at the time, of these excerpts from legal statutes, parish and household accounts, and eyewitness reports. They compiled this database predominantly by county and sometimes by city. Some 24 published collections were printed. Only in 2015 did they begin publishing in electronic form, but still along the same lines. Most universities today don't have complete access to the printed volumes. In fact, many of them have gone out of print. I checked, Guelph doesn't have any of them, and that's okay. Of course it's okay. Neither does Bucknell, so it's fine. And because even we have the PDFs, and because even after 40 plus years, the work is not complete, there are big spatial and temporal gaps in that work. It took me the better part of 3 years to figure out how to properly capture, I think I missed a slide in here, how to properly capture the content in the Inns of Court collection with which we started, which focuses on entertainments paid for were performed by members of London's legal fraternities, Gray's Inn, Middle and Inner Temple, Lincoln's Inn, and others. We had to figure out a stable format that would reflect Reed's transcriptive policies while providing the basis for flexible reading and faceted searching mechanisms within Quirk, which was simultaneously being upgraded and enhanced to the soon-to-be launched Leaf. I think this is, yes. The Civic Realm of London and the Civic London to 1518 collection, which is the one that we're focusing on right now, is crucial to the city's being. It constitutes both trade organizations, the worshipful companies, and municipal government, mayor, sheriffs, aldermen, etc. In the city, the aldermen were drawn from the 12 most powerful guilds, which I've listed here. I hope those are still correct, as well as at that time 36 more, and I think now there are over 110. And each year, from those 12 guilds, a mayor and 2 sheriffs were elected. In this way, the guild managed the business of the city, its function, in ways that seem peculiar, especially if you think of the power of ecclesiastical and aristocratic mechanisms that we usually associate as having dominated England's existence in the medieval, feudal, pre-modern era, especially before the Reformation. Just like modern fraternal organizations, the guilds were keen to celebrate their successes and marked important moments with pageants, banquets, and musical performances. They also contributed in ceremonial ways to entertainments that involved external entities, royals, ambassadors, cardinals, and the like. I should explain that the Reed records that we've been working with focus on things that are peripheral to the performances themselves. As I mentioned, they have to do with they pull from a different corpus of documents, but rarely do we find an actual reference to a performance itself. It's all about the business of the performance. And one of the things that particularly interests me is how the business of performance informs the business of the lives of the people in London at that time. So the Reed records we have mainly focus on the planning, financial purchase of goods and payment for services that demonstrate the ways in which the civic powers in the Civic London to 1558 participated. And here is where I'm going to shift into the work that I'm going to be doing. So it's going to be kind of exploratory at this point. It's not finished. But what I'm going to ask you to do is wait for the nail. In November 1501, Princess Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain, came to England to marry Henry VII's son and heir, Arthur, Prince of Wales, not the spare, that came later. Catherine, with her court and escort, sailed from Spain, and plans for the wedding began in July for the wedding that was going to take place at St. Paul's Cathedral in November. The mayor at the time, John Shaw, a goldsmith, was tasked with hosting the princess and her party, escorting them through the city to the cathedral, and orchestrating an interconnecting set of 6 pageants to be performed along the planned route. Reed's civic collection is broken down by year and then alphabetically by guild, as well as adding the minutes of the courts of common council and aldermen. So it becomes very difficult to try to move between things that are going on simultaneously, because you kind of, in the print version, have to sort by time and then by alphabet to find the guild you're looking for. In this case, we have roughly 23 of these record snippets in the Civic London to 1558. The records go from 1501 to 1503, and they refer to the 3 events about the wedding that the guilds participated in. Catherine's entrance into the city and the pageants that marked it, the journey of the royal party after the wedding up the Thames to Westminster, where there were banquets, jousts, and fireworks, and the journey of the royal party from Westminster to Mortlake in Richmond, where there was still much rejoicing. There are several I think I skipped some. There we go. There are several records documenting gifts that were purchased for the princess, the hiring of a barge to go to Mortlake at the king's command, as well as the victuals to be consumed on the barge, the bridge master's payments in September for producing the pageant set on London Bridge, the brewer's payment for the livery in blue they wore as they stood at Cornhill for their presence in the coming of Catherine. There's even a complex record that's in Latin, which I'm still trying to puzzle through, that describes the parade route and who was supposed to stand in which place along the route. But the records that I found most revealing were the ones that refer to building, the payments to build the stands and scaffold at the pageant locations throughout the city. And I don't know if I can go backwards. So if we think about, I'm just going to gesture this quickly, the pageant route, as it's described in that Latin record, starts at the bridge. It goes up Old Fish Street to what becomes Grace Church Street, and then it takes a turn west at Cornhill and goes along with stops all the way along the road where there were pageants marked. So that's some of the work that we need to do, is identify exactly where the pageant wagons were situated. Continues on through Cheap and then down to the west door of St. Paul's, where they dropped her off and the bishops picked her up for the wedding, I guess, something like that. But if we think about the idea of building scaffolds and stairs and railings that are going to keep people in place in what Kim and I were talking about are incredibly narrow streets, the idea of the role that these guilds played in keeping the peace, as well as ensuring that there wasn't catastrophe when people went tumbling into the street and were like trod over by one of the horses in this massive parade that included hundreds of people in all modes of transportation. It really changes the way that we think of the connection between the city and these types of royal performance or entertainment events. Ironically, weirdly, the guilds were also billed for cleaning up the city after she went by. So not only did they have to set it up, but they had to patch up the streets and clean away the trash after everything had happened, which seems odd to me. But okay, you know, if you're the mayor of London or you're one of the aldermen, you care about your city and its infrastructure. And this was not unusual at all for the kinds of work that the civil entities did in terms of entertainment in London. Oh, and I just wanted to point out that this is a really cool image in the Aegis map of a barge going up the Thames. And as with many things in the Aegis map and the map of early modern London, where I drew this from, you just keep tripping over really random cool things and this map was drawn in 1560, I think, somewhere around there. So it's about 6 years later than this, which is unusual. Let me just check where I am. Okay, so data-wise, we have lots of people, several named and most not. So we have people of note, we have royal family members, we have city officials, municipal officials. We have many who are not named, although identified by either their occupation or as a group. We also, from other sources, have the names, in fact, all the women who accompanied Catherine, which is something that I want to work on next. And if we're thinking about how we understand events and the way that I've been talking to Susan and Connie Crompton and the broader team that's thinking about these types of things, if we're talking about an event, we need 2 of 3 data points. We need a person or people, we need a location, and/or we need a date or date range. We also, I believe, need a reason why we're talking about the event or a cause. Otherwise, it's just a happening, I guess. And we need evidence that it happened. And in Read London, we have a goodly chunk of evidence referring to these occurrences. that take place from November 12th through November 26th. We have the wedding, which was the overall reason for this whole construction. We have the parade, the pageants, and the river journeys. We have the building, disassembling, food, drink, uniforms, and services provided by various guild members and workmen. If we think in terms of a beacon or transmitter from Reed London to other research data somewhere out there, we have the marriage of Catherine and Arthur, which may be the only thing that's important to other people, or it may be the point of connection between what we're doing in Reed London and other people. They may not necessarily be drawn by the fact that a guild was cleaning up and patching the road, the old Fish Street in front of the bridge, but they may be interested in that wedding. It has famous people, dynastic political context, dates. If we can use that beacon to capture data attention, if such a thing exists, then we can begin to push with it all of the frankly bizarre information that Reed London can offer. And what I'm going to be trying to do this spring is think about, and this is where Connie and I have been working together, to figure out how we can mesh together the kind of way that we've been capturing our records in TEI, or the Text Encoding Initiative standards, with the work that's being done in links using CIDOC classes and properties. I can't remember what CIDOC stands for off the top of my head. I never can. Just put it in the chat. And what I'm needing to do is create a whole new system within Reed London that connects those individual records and with event objects. So those event objects become the connection from what's in between and then serve as that beacon out there. So that's one of the challenges that I'm trying to figure out. What I also need to make sure of is, if we've created that beacon, how does that beacon pull back, which breaks the metaphor entirely? How do you pull back from that one point into the project itself, so that there is a two-way component and we're making sure that everything that is within Reed makes sense to itself as well as to the rest of the world? That is what I'm doing is still extremely clunky and certainly cannot be done for every one of the thousands of records in the Reed collections, but we can use this approach, I think, to begin to cluster the records in the project and start to turn it in a new direction from where it's been. So we can begin to answer questions. Why were the trumpeters paid? Because it was Christmas. Why were the litigants in court? They were arguing over the will of a prominent choir director. Why were the women being accompanied by jesters and dancers? Because apparently the humiliation and punishment of women was marked by song and dance. London at that time was a sick place. And yet. But here we are building understanding through micro and macro levels. For want of a nail, the scaffold was lost. For want of a scaffold, the crowd was lost. For want of a crowd, the pageant was lost. For want of a pageant, Catherine of Aragon was insulted and skipped back to Spain in a huff. The Reformation never happened, and Shakespeare never wrote Hamlet, and the world as we know it has ceased to exist. All for the want of a nail. In the last moments, I'd like to circle back to where we've been and what I think we need to attend to going forward. If you thought I was being unfair to the earlier digital humanists who 25 years ago built their projects on a wing and a prayer, let me reframe things. Without their visions for how their research might be undertaken and captured and shared through those digital means, if they hadn't tried and sometimes failed, but more often persevered, then we wouldn't have seen what was possible. And oftentimes, because those early colleagues of ours were isolated, working in departments and institutions that didn't quite get what had happened to them, they used to be such sensible humanists. They sought out others and formed communities, shared their experiences and frustrations and successes, and began to build the networks we thrive in today. And for every project that was put on a shelf, giving us 404 errors to let us know of their passing, we have other projects like the OED Online, tip of the hat to Frank Tompa at Waterloo, and consortia like the Text Encoding Initiative, who have found ways to align with existing publishers or built standards that are strong and flexible enough to assure textual editors the world over that it is better to adopt those standards in order for us to continue to benefit from their contributions, regardless of evolving web interfaces or widgets. There's a lot. And increasingly, there are significant discipline-changing projects like Orlando and Linked Early Modern Drama, as was the Internet Shakespeare editions, and the Women Writers Projects that have learned how to support generations-long research that has taught and provided professional opportunities to dozens, if not hundreds, of our colleagues who grew up in DH and are shaping it now. Without their experiences, we wouldn't have the vantage point we do now, and those project leaders deserve our gratitude, if only after the fact. I'll add too that for those who have handed on their code and their methodologies and their documentation, we are grateful because we can try to find ways to resurrect their work and give it new life in new contexts or in new forms of delivery. And if we think also about the attempts that they made to gain support from their universities, that work has profoundly informed our understanding of what universities are capable of and what they are not, and how we need to better articulate in clear and jargon-free words what we are asking from them, and for how long we need their help. Then we have the basis for a negotiation and honest discussion about how research aligns or doesn't with institutional goals. And I hadn't thought about this really before working on this paper, but it was because of that earlier outreach, I think, that universities began to pay attention to DH and what it could do in an initiative sense for them and their students, our students. That period from around 2010 to 2015, when the term digital initiative first gained traction and saw new administrative curiosity, in particular at universities that weren't traditionally seen as homes for humanities research at scale, like small liberal arts colleges and community colleges. If I seemed critical of such work before, it's because I've lived through it and suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, blah, blah, blah. Not really. I'm bruised a bit, but I'm here. When I have the chance to stop and reflect, I see that such efforts, many funded by philanthropic and federal agencies, helped us to understand that there isn't a one-size-fits-all academic model for DH, and we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't tried. Some universities and colleges were able to find traction among faculty to figure out if, how, or whether an intensive digital humanities curriculum was possible, and if so, how it might look: a major, a minor, a certificate, a master's or PhD program. And where a stable and structured community chose to be active, often in line with libraries and other spaces for learning and experimentation, collaboration emerged. Over these past couple of years, I've had the good fortune to work with some really amazing people that have taught me how to think more proactively about the ways we we manage projects, and how we think about it going forward, and how we think about tying things like change management with things like endings compliance, and we think about life cycle for projects more effectively. We need to think, and have been thinking, I think, better about, if we define a project that has funding for 3 years, and we know that we need to accomplish Y by the end of year 3, what do we need to accomplish in yes, I mixed up my letters. What do we need to accomplish in year 1? And that leads me to the dreaded data management plan. It is true that we cannot today envision what the technological landscape will look like in even 5 or 7 or 10 years' time. But because our work is increasingly complex and sophisticated and in need of long-term support, we need to start thinking more explicitly along the lines of what those designers of the cathedrals must have done. Who among them must have known, think about this. Whoop, nope, I lost that slide. Who among them must have known in the 13th century that Westminster Abbey would be transformed by the addition of flying buttresses in the 14th? Or rather that we, who in some way benefit from the existence of Westminster Abbey today, can do so because of the architecture and artisans beginning in the 11th century. And as someone pointed out recently, cathedrals like this weren't the result of magnanimous contributions by benevolent souls, but rather that there were often entities with ulterior motives who funded such construction. And it's important to keep that in mind even today. Like those early cathedral architects, we need to think about, if we can, some version of future proofing our projects without the concrete evidence of what that future will look like. Rather than scrambling to gobble together financial support for the next year, how do we work cooperatively with colleagues and communities and funding bodies to build infrastructure strong enough to hold the weight of our exponentially growing research ecosystems? And that leads me to my epilogue. Most digital I wrote this in 3X structure. Most digital humanists thrive on collaboration. I can't see how most of the work we do in whatever capacity could happen without an ability to and need to collaborate. And you can see how some of the great collaborations in the digital humanities have resulted in amazing research projects, national research and teaching communities like the one that proliferates here in Canada. And I really don't think you understand how rare that is. And I hope you learn how distinctive it is to work here in Canada, and why I'm so happy to be here this semester in a very good way. And collaborative spaces, tangible ones like this at Thinc Lab, or more abstract ones like teaching and training networks, have created opportunities for I have no idea how many researchers, builders, teachers that have come to collaborate with us, because on the whole, I think we are also kind of fun in those moments. But I think it's time we step forward. The Oxford English Dictionary definition for collaboration is united labor, especially in literary, artistic, or scientific work. That sounds about right. But collaborative modes of labor can sometimes remain in a state of perpetual experimentation, exploration, and play. And please don't get me wrong, it is just fine for some people to remain in that state, and playing is wonderful, and that place is where many thrive. But if we're going to start making sure that big projects and initiatives, and what I heard Susan describe as, or call ecotones, can not only survive, but thrive and continue to do so in some form long after most of us here have retired, or moved on, then we all need to step it up, be more intentional and focused and concerted about what we do. We need to focus on that word cooperation in that definition and see where it leads. Excuse the crowded slide. The OED defines cooperation as the action or practice of working together or with another or others towards the same end, purpose, or effect. They also define it as the principle or practice of engaging jointly in an economic activity and sharing the products or benefits with the others involved, the formation and operation of cooperative organizations. The keys for me here are towards the same end, purpose, or effect, and sharing the benefits with others involved, not just for others, that is teaching or service, but with others involved. How do we establish these spaces where we all contribute and we all benefit? I've been thinking about this a lot. The grant that I received from the Mellon Foundation was part of a program to find ways to establish digital edition publishing cooperatives. And the project that I lead at Bucknell is working to establish a cooperative for small universities, archives, and communities who don't necessarily have the access to the kind of infrastructure and skills to individually support digital scholarly edition production and publication on their own. And as part of this grant, we partnered with Cork to develop an enhanced version of the platform that is now Leaf, which would offer more capacity and expanded functionality to more projects doing different kinds of digital work. Until now, our focus on this grant, or my focus on this grant, has been thinking about the publishing part of things. How do we move effectively from development through dissemination? And until now, I've thought about this as a kind of contribution that Bucknell could make to our peer institutions and regional community partners, as well as our own faculty and students. But recently, in the final year of this grant, I've been struggling with whether the end result is what is actually important. What I spend my days working on, other than pedagogy, is production. So why not rethink this? What is the cooperative, or what is a cooperative after all? It is an association or society, especially one concerned with the production or distribution of goods or provision of services by its members and shares its benefits among them. It shares its benefits among the members. So I've been blinkered this whole time. Why are we not focusing on a digital production cooperative? And FYI, autocorrect on Google Docs wanted me to type digital revolution instead of digital production cooperative, which, okay, this may be that. I want to spend the time I have here during my Fulbright to think not only about Read London and early modern understandings of events, but I want to take this opportunity to cooperate with my colleagues here and in other universities in Canada to think about how we might use that concept of a cooperative to think about how we move forward. Therefore, once back to those nails, I realized I really struggled to bring the metaphor home. It worked twice. I didn't know if I could make it work the third time. But who are or what are the nails in this context? We can't be the nails. That doesn't seem to make sense. I don't think humans should be inanimate objects. I think that the nails are all the very many, very many and often the smallest seeming matters in order to avoid that great mischief. We need to use nails like open and accessible and interoperable software and fair principles and coding and data standards, quick fixes and patches and workarounds that might satisfy the timelines of our funding, but that hobble our efforts in the long run won't work. We need to use these nails to write our documentation. I know I'm terrible at this, and it's one of my New Year's resolutions to get better at documentation, to write work plans as well as data plans that make sense of our work in the context of our universities, and to negotiate new types of grant proposals that ensure living wages and benefits for the members of our cooperatives at an early stage of their careers. Then we can build foundations that are solid and secure and help us to move forward with stones and pillars and sculptures and windows, and maybe ultimately to ceilings and roofs that we may never see, but hope that we've ensured are possible. At least that's one way to look at things. Thank you. And thanks. I realize I don't have all the logos and it's not the most beautiful thank you slide, but I wanted to say thank you.